He was found on a stretch of desert outside Las Vegas, his neck broken, no autopsy ever performed. He was one of the greatest tenor players jazz ever produced, and the official report closed his case in a single afternoon. This is what heroin did to Bebop, not to one player, to a generation of them. Prison cells, wheelchairs, hospital beds, sidewalks in Amsterdam. I'm Sax Appeal, and tonight we're counting down 10 jazz musicians whose genius was matched only by the addiction that consumed it. Some clawed their way back, some never got the chance. Stay to the end, because number 1 is the man every single artist on this list was chasing, and the one who set the pattern for all of them to follow. Number 10. Wardell Gray. Wardell Gray had one of the most beautiful tenor sounds on the West Coast, a direct heir to Lester Young, good enough that Count Basie and Benny Goodman both wanted him in their sections. In May of 1955, Benny Carter called him for one more gig, the grand opening of the Moulin Rouge, a new integrated casino in Las Vegas, the first of its kind in the segregated city. Gray attended rehearsals. Then, on opening night, he simply didn't show. The next day, his body was discovered in the desert outside town. His neck was broken. Police ruled it a drug overdose and closed the case within hours. No autopsy was ever conducted. Nobody explained how a man could break his neck and fracture his skull, or how his body ended up dumped on open ground. To this day, nobody knows exactly what happened to Wardell Gray. What's certain is that heroin had already been eating away at his career for years before that night, and that the jazz world lost one of its great voices to a mystery it never solved. If you think that's dark, wait until you hear what happened to the man at number 9, because his mother was the most respected piano teacher in Boston, and it didn't save him either. Number 9. Serge Chaloff. Serge Chaloff was raised inside classical music royalty. His father played piano for the Boston Symphony. His mother taught some of the greatest musicians of the 20th century, and her own son became the man who proved a baritone saxophone could bebop just as fast as an alto. By 1947, at 24 years old, Chaloff was the star soloist of Woody Herman's Second Herd, anchoring the legendary Four Brothers saxophone section. He was also, by his own bandmates' account, the group's chief supplier of heroin, as deep in addiction as Charlie Parker himself. He clawed his way out. By 1954, Chaloff had actually kicked the habit, moved to Los Angeles, and recorded Blue Surge, widely considered one of the finest baritone sax albums ever made. Then came the cruelest twist. Doctors found a tumor on his spine. The paralysis spread fast. His final recording session, a reunion with his old Four Brothers, was played from a wheelchair. He was dead by 33, not from the drug that nearly ruined him, but from the disease that arrived right after he beat it. Up next, a trumpet prodigy who Dizzy Gillespie himself called the best of his generation, and whose own body gave out before his 30th birthday. Number 8. Fats Navarro. They called him Fat Girl, a cruel nickname for his size and his high voice, and it clearly stung. But on the trumpet, Fats Navarro had no equal. Dizzy Gillespie called his attack the best of anyone playing the horn. He recorded with Bud Powell, with Tad Dameron, with a young Sonny Rollins, building a case as the true rival to Gillespie himself. But Navarro followed Charlie Parker's example in the worst possible way, falling into heroin addiction early in his career. Bassist Charles Mingus remembered him coughing up blood on a tour bus, insisting he was just tired from the road. He wasn't tired. He had tuberculosis, and the drugs had wrecked his ability to fight it off. Before the week was out, he was dead. He was 26 years old, and he'd already reshaped how an entire generation of trumpet players, Miles Davis and Clifford Brown among them, thought about the instrument. Next, a pianist who got a second chance nobody saw coming, from the most unlikely source imaginable, the President of the United States. Number 7. Hampton Hawes. Hampton Hawes was a self-taught prodigy, second only to Oscar Peterson among his California peers, a fixture on LA's Central Avenue scene by his early 20s. Then, on his 30th birthday, federal agents arrested him for heroin possession. The DEA offered him a deal: name his suppliers, walk away. Hawes refused. The judge handed him 10 years in a federal prison hospital, double the mandatory minimum, a message aimed straight at the jazz world's drug problem. 3 years into his sentence, sitting in a Texas prison hospital, Hawes watched John F. Kennedy's inauguration on television. Something about the new president convinced him to try something almost nobody in his position tried. He wrote directly to the White House and asked for a pardon. In August of 1963, it actually happened. Kennedy granted Hawes executive clemency, one of only 43 such pardons issued that entire year. Hawes walked out, picked up his career, and kept recording for over a decade before his death in 1977. It remains one of the strangest, most improbable second chances in jazz history. Coming up, the saxophonist who spent 30 years behind bars for the same disease and came out to make some of the most devastating music of his life. Number 6. Frank Morgan. Frank Morgan was 14 years old when Duke Ellington himself offered him a spot in his orchestra. His father said no, he was too young. By 21, Morgan had already recorded a stunning debut album and was being talked about as the next great alto voice out of Charlie Parker's own bloodline. He was also already using heroin, following his idol Bird down the exact same road, despite Parker's own warnings to him not to. What followed wasn't a spiral, it was 3 decades. Arrests, thefts to feed the habit, stretch after stretch behind bars, including a long run at San Quentin, where he and fellow addict Art Pepper formed a band so good that visitors took prison tours just to hear them play. In 1985, after 30 years, Frank Morgan walked out and recorded again. Critics couldn't believe what they heard. A bebop voice from the 1950s, fully formed, untouched by 3 lost decades, aching with everything those years had cost him. He built a real career from the wreckage before his death in 2007. His story proves something rare in this list, that redemption, even this late, was still possible. If these stories are hitting you the way they're hitting me, do me a favor and hit subscribe before we go any further, because the next 5 entries get heavier, and they end with the man who defined this entire tragedy. All right, let's keep going. Number 5. Grant Green. Grant Green's guitar sound is one of the most sampled in music history. Instantly recognizable. Built on a stripped-down tone, George Benson said came from killing the bass and treble and living entirely in the mid-range. Blue Note Records made him their house guitarist, putting him on more than 30 sessions as leader between 1961 and 1965 alone. Then heroin caught up with him. From 1967 to 1969, Green all but vanished from recording studios, sidelined by addiction and the chaos it created in his life. He came back with a funkier, more commercial sound in the 70s, chasing hits to pay the bills and support 6 children. But the drug never fully let go, and by 1978, his health had collapsed so badly he spent most of the year hospitalized. Against doctors' direct orders, Green checked himself out to go earn money on the road. He drove across the country for a gig, then drove all the way back. Days later, in New York, he collapsed in his car of a heart attack. He was 43. Up next, a piano genius whose addiction was only half the story. The other half started with a police officer's nightstick. Number 4. Bud Powell. Bud Powell didn't just play bebop piano. He basically invented the vocabulary every bebop pianist after him would use. Then, in 1945, New York police beat him over the head during an arrest for public drunkenness. He was 21 years old, and he was never fully the same again. The head trauma triggered years of psychiatric hospitalization, electroshock treatment, and a fight against mental illness that ran alongside a growing dependence on alcohol and, at times, heroin. Powell kept creating extraordinary music through it all. Some of the most influential recordings in jazz history came in the years right after that beating. But the toll compounded. Institutionalizations became routine. A move to Paris in the late 50s gave him a few stable years and a devoted circle of friends, including the pianist who wrote round midnight tributes in his honor. It wasn't enough to undo the damage. He returned to New York in 1964, diminished, and died just 3 years later, at 41, worn down by tuberculosis, alcohol, and a body that had been failing since that night on a Harlem sidewalk 2 decades earlier. Next, an alto player whose own memoir is so brutally honest, it's still considered one of the greatest books jazz has ever produced. Number 3. Art Pepper. Art Pepper had one of the most immediately identifiable alto tones on the entire West Coast jazz scene, a sound so lyrical it seemed to contradict everything happening in his personal life. Because behind that sound was one of the most severe heroin addictions in jazz history, and multiple stretches inside San Quentin State Prison to prove it. Pepper didn't hide any of it. In his 1979 memoir, Straight Life, he laid out his addiction, his crimes, and his time behind bars with a level of honesty that shocked even other addicts. It remains, alongside Hampton Hawes's own memoir, one of the most unflinching documents ever written by a jazz musician.
She said, I got a real young man.
What makes Pepper's story different is the ending. In the late 1970s, well into his 50s, he got clean and mounted one of the most celebrated comebacks in jazz history, recording prolifically and touring internationally right up until his death in 1982.
Ready? Willing?
He proved that the damage heroin does isn't always the final word, but he also proved just how much of a life the drug can take before somebody gets the chance to fight back. And now, the two names that loom over everyone on this list. At number 2, the trumpet player whose face literally became a casualty of his addiction.
She said, get lost with
Number 2, Chet Baker. Chet Baker had the kind of face and the kind of trumpet tone that made him a genuine teen idol in the 1950s, a rare thing for a jazz musician. Critics compared his cool, vulnerable sound to a young Miles Davis. Then heroin took hold, and it never let go for the rest of his life. The addiction cost him almost everything. In 1966, he was assaulted in San Francisco in a confrontation widely linked to his drug debts, and his teeth were knocked out, devastating for any trumpet player, since embouchure depends entirely on the mouth. He had to essentially relearn how to play the instrument from scratch, using dentures. He did it. Baker rebuilt his career in the 1970s and 80s, touring Europe extensively and recording prolifically, his voice on record turning even more fragile and haunting with age. But the addiction that shaped his entire adult life never fully released its grip. In 1988, Baker was found dead on the pavement below his hotel room window in Amsterdam. He had fallen from the second floor. Heroin and cocaine were found in his system. He was 58 years old, and even in death, the drug that defined his career had the final word. Which brings us to number 1, the man whose name became a synonym for genius and self-destruction both. The artist every single musician on this list was chasing, one way or another. Number 1, Charlie Parker. Every story on this list runs back to one man, Charlie Bird Parker. Didn't just play bebop, he invented it, rewriting the rules of jazz improvisation so completely that trumpet players, saxophonists, and pianists spent the rest of the century trying to catch up to what he'd already done in the 1940s. He started using heroin as a teenager in Kansas City, and it never let go. Musicians who worshipped his playing began imitating his addiction too, convinced, wrongly, that the drug was somehow the source of his genius, rather than the thing constantly threatening to destroy it. Parker's life became a cycle of brilliance and collapse, a 1946 breakdown so severe he was committed to a state hospital, arrests, missed gigs, pawned saxophones, a body pushed past its limits by heroin, alcohol, and a diet that left him overweight and unwell in his 30s. On March 12, 1955, Charlie Parker died in a friend's New York apartment while watching television. The coroner who examined him estimated his age at somewhere between 50 and 60. He was 34 years old. That gap between the body on the table and the number on his birth certificate says everything about what addiction did to the greatest genius jazz ever produced, and everything about why every name on this list followed, in one form or another, the road he paved first. Some of these men got a second act. Frank Morgan walked out of prison after 30 years and made music that still stops people cold. Art Pepper wrote the truth down and used what was left of his life to prove a comeback was possible. Others, Parker, Navarro, Gray, Green, never got that chance at all. What's left behind is the music. Every solo on this list was recorded by a human being fighting something most of us will never have to understand. That doesn't excuse what addiction cost them. It just makes what they managed to create, in spite of it, that much harder to believe. If this documentary meant something to you, subscribe to Sax Appeal for more jazz history, the triumphs and the tragedies both, because the music this genre gave the world came at a cost, and it deserves to be remembered honestly.